Today's lesson is on investigating formulas and rules, and it can be found on page 91. For question number 1, the first step is going to be looking at the formula that they are giving you. Now, this is written with words instead of variables, but it is still a formula. And if we wanted it to look more like the formulas we were using yesterday, we would go 2 times the term number. Well, our term number we could replace with n plus 1. So these are 2 different ways of writing the same formula. Now the first part is going to ask you to fill in this chart where they tell you the term equals 2 times the term number plus 1. So if we were to figure this out, we'd go, okay, 2 times the term number plus 1 equals, we do our multiplication first, 2 plus 1, which is 3. So our first term would be 3. Then we'd go, okay, our term number is now 2. So 2 times 2 plus 1 equals 4 plus 1 equals 5. So our term is 5. And then we do our third term number, 2 times 3 plus 1. And 2 times 3 is 6 plus 1 equals 7. So that becomes our next term number. Then we have 2 times our term number, which is 4 plus 1. So that is 8 plus 1 is 9. Oh, and I need to add in another little line here. I hit backspace too many times before. And then 2 times 5 plus 1. We always do our multiplication first. 10 plus 1 equals 11. Now, to fill in our sequence is made up of our 5 terms. So we would just go 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. So you put your terms onto the lines. Then we need to find the gaps. So to get from 3 to 5, we add 2. To get from 5 to 7, we add 2. 7 to 9, we add 2, and 9 to 11, we add 2. Now, we need to write our rule. So remember, our rule is in words, and instead of it just dealing with our formula, we're not going to write 2 times the term number plus 1. We're actually going to look at the sequence and figure out the rule for the pattern. So the format it will work with is start at something, and then you're either going to add or subtract, and then what number you add or subtract each time. So for this one, we go, okay, we start at 3, and then we add or subtract. Well, we add, and how much do we add each time? We add 2. So for our first blank here, it's whatever our first term is, and then our gap tells us whether we add something or we subtract something and how much. So this is what you'll be doing for each of the different questions in question 1. Now for questions 2 to 5, I'm not necessarily going to go through each question because they're just asking you for information based on what you're seeing from taking a formula, turning it into a table, making that into a sequence, and writing a rule. But there are several connections I'm going to point out to you that will help you with answering these questions. Now, the first thing I'm going to point out is that the gap in a sequence is always the number that you multiply the variable by. Now there is a fancy name for this. This is called, if we remember, the coefficient. Remember, co means with, so it is with the variable. And so if you look here, because we're multiplying by 2, we're actually getting another group of 2 each time, which is why the gap goes up by 2. So the gap in the sequence is usually the number that you are multiplying the term number by in your formula. Now, you've probably already noticed that when you are looking at your rule, whatever we put in the second set of blanks, either the add this or subtract this, tells you your gap for the sequence, which is how we come up with it. Now, for the rule, the start at blank is always your first number when you're writing out your sequence, right? That's where you start, that's your first number. Now, with the rule, to find the next term in the sequence, you just have to keep the pattern going, right? So you'd add another 2 to find the 6th term, add another 2 to find the 7th term, and so on until you try to find the 10th term. However, with a formula, if they wanted you to find, say, the 7th term, you could, if we were using the same formula we were given up here, you can simply put the number for whatever term they want you to get in the place of n. So if they want you to find the 7th term, you just solve 2 times 7 plus 1. If they want you to find the 10th term, you just go 2 times 10 plus 1. So it's a little bit easier to find standalone numbers using a formula as opposed to the pattern where you have to keep the sequence going until you get to that number. Now, when you're looking at the formula, we already talked about how the gap is the number you multiply by, right? Now, the first term in the sequence is always, whatever it would be, is your gap, and then plus or minus the, like, add 1 or subtract whichever. So for this one, our first term would be 2 plus 1, which is 3. And there we go. Our first term is 3. So it's whatever you multiply by and then add there. It's basically if you took the n and made it 1. That's what would happen. And we already talked about how you would find the 10th term in a sequence. So if you needed to find the 100th term in a sequence, it's probably a lot easier to use a formula and just go, okay, 2 times 100 plus 1 versus having to write out the first 100 numbers in the pattern, even if you're only going up by 2 each time. When you're finished all of your work, remember to complete the Google form. There's just 2 questions for today. And when you're finished, you need to make sure you hit the purple submit button. And then in the assignment itself, there's a green turn in button that will also let me know that you are finished. As always, let me know if you need any help, and I will gladly set up a Zoom meeting.